Welcome on to the Dunked On post-trade deadline edition special. Thanks to all you who are joining us on YouTube. Apologies that I don't have good light on my face, but since I'm going to be staring at spreadsheets for this entire show, I can't have that light in my eyes. My eyes will pop out of my head. But thanks to everyone who's joining. We will get to your questions in the second half of the show. What do you think is the biggest thing that's gone down since we last recorded about midday yesterday?
There were a number of significant players who did not get traded, but we could start with one of the significant ones who did that we didn't necessarily expect, and that's Ivica Zubac being traded away from the Clippers, going to the Indiana Pacers, and the terms of this are very interesting. So Ivica Zubac, along with Kobe Brown, are going to the Pacers in exchange for Benedict Mathurin, Isaiah Jackson, and 3 picks. The Pacers own unprotected in 2029, Dallas's second-round pick in 28, and then the one that's really interesting. So we get a rare double-sided protected pick. So the Pacers retain the selection if it is 1-4 or 10-30. If it is 5 through 9, the Clippers get it. If the Clippers do not get the 26 pick, it doesn't convert to next year. It converts to 2031. So I think this is a really significant structure and negotiation for Lawrence Frank and the Clippers.
Yeah, and I think this for Zubac, a guy we looked at as a top 10 center on a good contract for 2 more years after this one. It was probably going to take a package like this. We thought maybe that the Clippers would be open for business after James Harden got his way out of town. This pick that you mentioned, there's one other at least significant pick. John actually told me that the Grizzlies did a pick like this too, but there's only one other significant one that I can recall, which is actually one of the more legendary traded picks in NBA history, where the Rockets traded Kyle Lowry to the Raptors, and they reverse protected lottery that pick, and it was also protected 1-3 on the top end, and that ended up being the number 12 pick. Went to the Thunder by that point. The Rockets got it, then sent it to the Thunder as probably the centerpiece in the James Harden trade, and then it became Steven Adams. So this one is a very creative pick. Let's talk about it first from the Pacers standpoint, actually, because I think it's for the Clippers, where they are as a team right now, I think it's pretty obvious you probably got to take this deal, and I think they did well. What about from Indiana's standpoint?
Zubac, I think that he is a reasonable bet. If we're saying independent of the offer in terms of a center of the present / future. Zubac, this is his age 28 season, though this year matters a lot less for the Pacers. Age 29, age 30. He's big. I think he will age reasonably well. And Zubac has a very team-friendly contract. And for a franchise that is very cost-conscious, having a center on a team-friendly deal as opposed to, let's say, what Walker Kessler could get in restricted free agency. There are reports that the Pacers at least made some offers to the Jazz for Walker Kessler. So from that perspective, I think that if your goal is to make a credible team for the next couple of years around a hopefully returning Tyrese Halliburton, around Pascal Siakam, depending on how those guys age, I think that he is a reasonably good fit. Now, one of the weaknesses of Zubac compared to some of the other guys, one is age, that he's a little bit older than some of those guys. And the other one is that Zubac doesn't shoot. Going back to when he was once traded for Mike Muscala, like that is something that I'm sure a number of different potential trade suitors would like. So I think that the Pacers identifying Zubac as their center of the near-term future is a reasonable one. However, this is a bigger price than I would have been willing to give up as the Pacers for this player.
Yeah, I think that there are a number of components to it that actually remind me that I want to talk about. Well, hey, maybe they could have just re-signed Miles Turner and not had to give up all this stuff. We could talk about that later. But yeah, I think Zubac's probably better than Turner. Yeah, he doesn't shoot. Like his fit with Siakam is going to be an interesting question, right? because he is going to take up space in the interior. He's also like not as fast maybe as Miles Turner, because eventually what the Pacers are doing here is getting the band back together from last year. Tyrese Halliburton hopefully comes back. He's the same guy, and they're ready to just roll with the same sort of team that got them to the finals. I don't think Zubac he's maybe a little bit better screener and roller than Miles Turner. Turner had a little more speed though, and with the Pacers, the way they like to get out of actions quickly, that could be really useful. Now, the thing that I do like about Zubac that Turner didn't provide as much is they are great at ducking in. And Zubac is that he's not necessarily someone you're going to give the ball to on a straight post up that often. But if there's any kind of a switch or two on the ball type of coverage, and you have a smaller guy trying to come over and take away his role, he can just post up right at that charge circle, get the ball with their great passing and movement, and foul with the or get fouled or shoot his little hook shot that he's very effective with. So I don't know. It may actually turn out that he does as much for them as Miles Turner did, just in a different way. He makes things maybe a little bit more difficult for Siakam's isolation game, but Siakam can still run. He just gives them another place to go offensively too. So they traded Mather in this deal, so they're not going to have that as much. And Siakam, I think, has been overused this year. So I do like that the offensive aspect. The more I think about it, and he also can just lay the wood on a screen in a way that some of their other centers obviously were not going to. And then defensively, not maybe as versatile as Turner was. Again, the reason I'm obsessed with Turner here is just trying to think like what is this team going to be relative to when they were good last year. But he's a better rim protector as well. I did think he had slipped some this season. Like this is definitely the Clippers capitalizing on what he did last year. I'm not sure that what he did this year is quite worth this package, and he is, that last year may have been his high watermark. Also a much better post defender, right? Like he's pretty decent. If they ever got to the finals against Jokic or anyone else, Joel Embiid, he would probably be a pretty decent matchup against if that was ever it. There aren't great post players in the East though. So I think he probably makes them better defensively than they were before. And offensively, it's kind of arguable. They had to give up a lot to get him. Contract is cost control for the next couple of years, which for this cheap organization is important. So,
So
what does all that add up to you?
Well, the thing that I wanna take a sec to be talk about, and this is always useful for a team that isn't competitive this year, is what is the Pacers team and what are their ages for next year? So Tyrese Halliburton, that'll be his age 25 season. Siakam 31, Zubac 29, Aaron Nesmith 26, and of course Benedict Mathurin is gone now. Andrew Nembhard 26, and so that is a strong in terms of overall talent level. That is a strong starting five. It is, to my eye, a pretty shallow team outside of those players. Now they will get some reinforcements. Hopefully, Obi Toppin will be fine. And I want to talk about the Pacers' finances in just a bit. But in terms of like what that team is, I think that they'll lose just the magic of the 2025 playoffs. Like that's something that would have been hard to recapture for any team. And their amazing comebacks, everything else. But the way they play hard, the way they make other teams work, I think some of that stuff could be the case. So I think the Pacers will be in the mix, and this year's East is weaker than last year's East, but there are reasons to believe, especially with Jason Tatum hopefully being a better version of himself, if he even comes back this year, that next year's East will be more in line with 25 than with 26.
Next year's East could be like pretty good. Like that, it's now again, we thought that about the West this year. Teams are always going to have injuries, are always going to have disappointments. But yeah, I mean, with Boston and the Pacers coming back online, and Philly looking like they could possibly be a force again,
Cleveland,
and Cleveland, and the Magic. I think they'll probably be better next year than they were this year, as long as they could get some better health from Franz. And yeah, the Wizards are going to be trying to make the playoffs next year as well. Atlanta presumably is going to do something this offseason to try to build up. Chicago will be right there for 39 wins again. Okay. Yeah, I think for Indiana, you said you wanted to talk about their finances going forward. Maybe this is a chance to do that.
I think one of the clear motivators here for Kevin Pritchard and company is that the tax has been a hard line for Herb Simon his entire tenure. And depending on what happens, and it's a big if, with their 2026 first, because if they keep it, it's probably going to be very expensive. This team will be able to navigate the luxury tax. I had talked previously about the idea that making some of the other things they did that might open the door, what I did in the mock too, but they'll be top end, was to make it easier to retain Benedict Mathurin. Benedict Mathurin is no longer there, and they have all these guys lined up. So with their existing salaries, they're close to the tax line, but like manageable distance if they need to. One of the unusual elements of next year's Pacers is that they basically don't have any expiring contracts that are big. I mean, if they want to burn some of their young guys, they could. But if they needed to get out of the tax, they could do so pretty cleanly. And that's one of the benefits of the margin between Zubac's contract, where he'll make $19.6 million next year. And we don't know exactly what Miles Turner would have taken, but Turner is making $26.6 next year. Is that $7 million? That might mean the difference between getting to keep some of their other depth players and having to dump them and potentially with an asset.
Yeah, I mean, they should have a pretty deep team now. They got Jay Huff, who could be a change of pace, or they could go with Toppin and Siakam together in their backup front court if they wanted to go that route. We'll see whether Jarris Walker can actually emerge into, backup small forward. Like, that's where they're a little light now without Mathurin, but as you noted, they're never going to be able to retain him anyway. They still got Neesmith as the starting 3. Ben Shepherd has been okay as a backup too, but it hasn't had a good year this year. Might be better going forward. Maybe Johnny Furphy could move into that role, or they could try to sign somebody in free agency. So they're looking like they have a pretty good squad for next year. It's just a question of whether Tyrese Halliburton is going to come back and beat Tyrese Halliburton. And maybe that doesn't happen until the playoffs. Maybe it never happens. That happens with guys with Achilles. TJ McConnell is going to be in his age 34 season next year. Is he really going to be able to still give them as much off the bench? But I think they've rebuilt this team to where if Halliburton is Halliburton, you kind of just have to proceed that way. Maybe what you could argue, I think the biggest reason against this deal to me is, why did you have to do it now? Why not wait until the draft? See who you get. Now, they did top 4 protect it, and maybe they just feel like there's only 4 guys in this draft that they really like that much. I will find out when I do my scouting how I feel about that. People are saying it's more of a 5-player draft. But overall it's still pretty good. So, but maybe why not wait and see what kind of a pick you get and what you could get for that deal, trading, the 7 pick in the draft then. And also, I mean, I really would almost have wanted to wait maybe until next year's trade deadline to get an idea of like whether Tyrese Halliburton is actually Tyrese Halliburton or not. And if he's not, then maybe you just have to accept that this era is not going to happen. So this is a big bet on Halliburton right now. And we'll have to see how things change out with the pick and also just what Tyrese is going to be next year. So I'm go ahead.
As an epilogue of sorts, this is another illustration of how bad a mistake Joe Dumars made, because this was the primary return in a trade for a high-level center, was the pick that he basically gave up for a late first last year.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, that's recriminations for Joe Dumars are nothing new here.
We'll have
so, yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, what's your answer? Would you have done this deal now as Indiana?
No. I would not have done this deal now as Indiana. I really like the idea of seeing what they have. When you were talking about it, I was thinking about the point that you made years ago with the LeBron AD Lakers, which is you need to see if this team is worth the investment. And with the Pacers, it's more specifically Tyrese Halliburton. And it might not have been Zubac specifically, though it actually could have been. But with the assets that they gave up in this deal, if you were willing to throw that stuff in for a center, or a player of another position, wings are always tougher, you could have gotten somebody damn good. And Zubac, it's not a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And the value of time and information for the Pacers, I think, is immense. And they did protect the best case scenarios, but I was thinking back to the idea that the Brooklyn Nets, I guess at that point they might have been the New Jersey Nets, the pick they gave up for Gerald Wallace that became Damian Lillard. And you never know exactly where these things are going to shake out. And I would rather, if especially because you don't need the player for this year, I would rather see where your draft evaluation is, see where the landscape is, and then make the move either then or at the deadline. I think that you do this move with this price and this timing for a more special player than Zubac is.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of counters to that. I'm talking myself into this a little bit more because it is. I actually think this is a pretty high upside play for the Pacers because they just weren't going to have another room for another high salary player. And so the ability to get this type of player making 20 million was just so massive for them. And while I said, hey, let's see if Halliburton's back, let's see if whether this team's worth investing in at the deadline. Well, what if they're, they don't have a center next year and they're 3 games over 500 at the deadline? Maybe this gives you a defensive floor while Halliburton is trying to find his sea legs again next year. And you should be pretty good on defense with Halliburton, Nembhard, Nesmith, Siakam, and Zoo. Like, that's hopefully going to be a top 10 defense and lets you kind of figure things out. Also, you probably could retrade Zoo if things really went wrong. And I don't know if you could get a pick quite like this, but you get something. So I think I am talking myself into this for the Pacers. I think this was especially probably the biggest risk to me is just that he's not going to be as good as he has been. Right?
Well,
If he so I mean, do you agree with me that if he plays the way he played last year for a couple of years, it's worth doing?
Probably. I mean, I don't know this draft well enough yet to say whether a 5 through 9 is great in this draft. But I want to flag one other thing, and it's probably unfair to Zubac, but I brought up before that over the years I've grown to appreciate that perimeter defense is a young man's game. But there are times with centers where somebody's a really good rim protector until they're not. And so last year, in terms of rim protected wins, or we can do contest percentages. So last year, Zubac contested a little bit under 36% of opponent attempts, and they made 56.7% of the ones he contested. This year, the overall numbers with Zubac as a rim protector are way worse. He's contesting 29%, and opponents are making still 56% of those. And so when a contest rate goes down, like that's not, but the guy I was thinking of is Jakob Poeltl. And Poeltl, when he was young, was this really
Turner
good,
is another one of those too, actually.
Where there were these really good rim protectors until they took even a smaller step back. And with Zubac, because he doesn't space the floor, because he's not as defensively versatile, if he's not the player he was last year defensively, then this is a huge problem for the Pacers because they don't have as many guys who can clean up those messes. They have capable defenders, but they also have some limited ones, and they're be less versatile with Zubac than they were with Miles Turner. So I'm going to say that I would not have done this deal.
Yeah, I think I would have. Part of Zoo's case last year was really more based on just the low overall number of shots that opponents took at the rim rather than what exactly happened when he contested. And I actually think maybe his offensive game, that's one of the bigger reasons when I really started thinking about this as we were talking, because so much just happened, obviously. I'm wrapping my head around this now, that the way that he can play and duck in and just the size that he brings, like, it's just going to add an element that the Pacers kind of didn't have with his toughness. Is just something you have to deal with. They're not really great on the offensive glass. That's another thing that he's going to give them. So I actually think his addition as an offensive force may be a little bit underrated. And that's something I don't expect to wane. Maybe his defense will a little bit. And also he's been pretty durable, which is important. So let's see if we got a few comments on this that we could hit on this specific trade. 97 MDM says Pacers overpaid. I guess it depends what the pick ends up being, right? I mean, I think if they had, you don't do this deal unless you get the top 4 protection. Would I preferred top 5? Yeah, that might have been nice, but then that just has too low of a chance of actually going. The Clippers probably wouldn't have wanted to do it. So and then it's very unlikely that it'll be below 10. So basically, what is it, about a 50% chance that it goes and 50% that it doesn't? Maybe a little bit lower than that. Um, yeah, I could see that argument, but I think when you're in a position to potentially win a championship, you're almost always going to have to overpay, and they're overpaying for the contract as well. That's the thing, right? Like,
Hmm.
he's making a lot less than Miles Turner is, and he's better, and so that's a huge difference. And they didn't have room to fit a $40 million player in, right? You might be like, oh, hey, why didn't they just go after Jaren Jackson Jr.? Well, they can't afford Jaren Jackson Jr. Uh,
Hmm.
so now maybe they should have just done it anyway, but like then they still would have needed a center as well. Had to boost Siakam to the three. That wouldn't have worked out that well. I mean, they could have maybe come up with the matching salary for Jaren this year, but probably not in future years when he goes up to 50 million. So now, if they weren't, I think it's a good argument that, hey, if these guys were actually willing to pay a reasonable amount of tax for a contending team, then this package could have gotten them a better player than Zubac, could have gotten them like a third star instead.
It's a really strong return, and to use an old chestnut for me, ownership is the biggest competitive advantage in the NBA, and any team that sees the luxury tax as a hard line, irrespective of team quality, is going to suffer in certain ways. And the Obi Toppin contract, there are a number of different ones where it's like you have to be really judicious with those sorts of things, and they overpaid for the contract. And so given their constraints, you can understand why Kevin Pritchard did it, even though I've said I wouldn't have done the deal, but that is dealing with a constraint that should be hard for Pacers fans to stomach when they're as good as they were last year. Like, this is a team that was one game away, maybe one injury away from winning the title last year, even if there's no guarantee they get back to that level.
Yeah, and 97 says screen and dive centers are easy to find. And that's actually, I kind of disagree with you that it's just, he's a rim rolling center because he has the offensive rebounding. He has that deep post up ability. If you want to try, like, remember with Miles Turner, a lot of times teams wouldn't even put their center on Miles Turner, right? Or they might try to guard Siakam with their center. And now you can't do that. Zubac is just too big. He's going to kill you. That way, teams would try to switch against the Pacers. Zubac could really help to obviate that strategy too. I do think, I mean, it's an interesting point what 97 is saying, right? Like, where do you go from, where's the line from like a Daniel Gafford type to Zubac, and how much is it worth paying for in that difference? I mean, Zubac to me he was in my top 3 defensive player of the year last year. So I think it's really, if he is at that same level that he was last year, it's worth it. I certainly share your concern though, Danny. Like, I'm right on the borderline here, but I think you have to take risks to get into, to be a true title team, and they have Tyrese Haliburton. Siakam, they had to do this now because Siakam's getting pretty old. Like, how long is he going to be Siakam for? All right. Any of these other comments, Pacers wise, we should hit? We could turn to the Clippers portion of this momentarily. Let's see.
That's all I really saw from the Clipper. Oh, which package do you prefer, the Jaren Jackson package or the Zubac package? What I like the strength of the top end of the picks here. Like, I think that's something, the possibility of getting, because it's either, I mean, you're either getting 5 through 9 this year, or the Pacers in 31. There's just so much volatility for each year. Now, unprotected picks they have less upside than some think, unless they were traded by the Brooklyn Nets, because they're almost never super, super good in terms of lottery odds. Now, if you happen to bump up or whatever, you could do that. But it's still, the Pacers could be in a very different place. And ownership, if ownership's still not willing to pay the tax or whatever else like that, like, I think that there's a decent chance that the 31 Pacers are not fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, that 31 Phoenix picks, I probably like that better for the receiving team than 31 Indiana, but obviously there's a pretty decent chance of this being a lottery pick, which or a top 10 pick, I should say. So I think I probably do like this deal better for the Clippers than I do the Jaren deal for Memphis, and that just shows you when, like, Jaren's market was probably more limited. There's been a little bit of reporting on that, and that a team like the Jazz that's not, is trying to take the next step could afford Jaren, whereas maybe a team like the Pacers felt like they couldn't afford Jaren, and because he's going to be making close to 30% of the salary cap going forward, and Zubac is going to be making, whatever that ends up being, 10% of the salary cap, or at least 10% of the luxury tax by the end of this, something like that. Okay, so let's turn to the Clippers standpoint here. The Clippers realized that they weren't going anywhere. They weren't winning a championship this season. One of my biggest qualms, which we'll get to, is, well, they really should have just moved Kawhi Leonard. I don't know if they gauged that at all, but if you're going to move Harden and you're going to move Zubac, and Kawhi Leonard is playing this well, you might as well do that too. And maybe that'll happen in the offseason. Maybe teams just thought he was radioactive due to the scandal, possibly his contract getting voided. Maybe it all came together too quickly. Teams just don't want to be in the Kawhi business just because he's a little crazy and difficult to deal with, or his representation is. But in terms of this, I think the Clippers did a good job of kind of making it seem like, oh, we can just keep him. And when they didn't have to trade him, then they needed to be bowled over. And I don't know that they even necessarily intended to trade him, but this deal was, to me, too good to pass up.
Agreed. And that's the threshold that I would be using as Lawrence Frank and the Clippers. Now, I'm a little bit more risk averse with centers in their late 20s, where it's, there is a chance that it falls off and you really can't get a true premium. But this is too strong a package. I said it's better than what the Utah Jazz gave up for Jaren Jackson Jr. And so from the Clippers perspective, you get the potential of like serious assets here. And just because if it ends up being 5 through 9, you're not getting a top 4 pick. There's still plenty of high level prospects, especially if this draft ends up being well regarded, who end up falling into that range. We've seen it a lot over the years. And if players want to manipulate their way to certain places, maybe the Clippers could make that more easy than certain other teams if they want to, being in a major market, all those sorts of things. And so for them, those assets are strong. And then the other, so the answer is it better to trade him now than later? My answer is you traded him now. The Clippers do not get the benefit of getting worse now because they do not have control over their own pick. That there are other teams, most notably the Oklahoma City Thunder, who will benefit from that in less.
Yeah, Thunder have their pick next year too, by the way, via swap, in case anyone forgot.
Yes, so that is huge for the Thunder. And then so the assets are the main part here. And then they did one of the other important benefits for the Pacers in this trade, because of how conscious they are, is they made a very bad bet with Isaiah Jackson, giving him, recovering from a significant injury, 3 guaranteed seasons. Part of the cost they paid was getting off of his salary. And so the difference in overall payment between Zubac and Isaiah Jackson is actually probably a lot less than some people might think. And so Isaiah Jackson over this year and the remaining 2, he's going to make $21 million, and Ivica Zubac is going to make 58.7. So like that actually narrows the financial margin on this trade significantly. Another thing that made it easier. The Clippers at this point, like, yeah, they have this 2027 plan potentially. Doesn't matter. They've got enough spending power. They could, at that point, Isaiah Jackson would be making $6.4 million because his contract descends. So if you needed to stretch it or do something, you obviously could. Benedict Mathurin for them.
Yeah. Yeah. That was one of the questions that we got of whether Mathurin could evolve into a two-way player for the Clippers. And I think it's possible, but also they are going to just need some creation now. I would say, he probably slots in as their starting 2 guard the rest of the year. And so if Garland could go back, Mathurin, Kawhi, they might still be able to make up a play-in push, honestly, if Kawhi is going to just be playing. It seems kind of weird that he's still on this team, given how good he was, but the Clippers are just kind of in a weird stasis at the moment, having traded Zubac. Now, the Clippers also have the possibility of maybe just, if they get this pick in the offseason, they could trade it and maybe try to build up again that way with the group that could be competitive in the West. It doesn't seem like their style necessarily. But back to Mathurin, I think it's really more like his future to me is like solid bench scorer. I just don't think he has the mentality to defend, and he's a little bit too small to play the 3. He was forced into that role in Indiana. So I would say no, I don't see him being a two-way player. Like he's not going to just get run over, which is nice. But he also is like he kind of wants to drive the ball, doesn't move it that well, doesn't like he'll make shots, but he's not really trying to take threes and space the floor. So that's why he really is better as a bench guy. And hey, if he really has it, you can play him in a game and have him close. If not, then you could sit him down. It's just a question of what he's going to get in the offseason. But he's definitely a winner of this trade deadline to get to somewhere where he could, in theory, get paid. And he's going to have plenty of runway now. The Clippers have had nothing at shooting guard all season.
Well, I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword for Mathurin. I think that in terms of his opportunity over the next few months, it's definitely a win for him because the Clippers, they don't really have a lot else going on. They can evaluate. There's a motivation to see a good version of him. However, I brought this up with Peyton Watson before. I think there's a real benefit as a restricted free agent to your overall eventual contract, to being in a place where teams think you can't be retained because they don't have to, you don't scare teams off by having your match rights. And so the Clippers, they don't have a lot going on.
Well, but I mean, that's a little different though, when the team in question just like obviously doesn't even want you to begin with, right? Peyton Watson has been good enough where they're actually going, like he would have suitors and his team would want to retain him. It's just they might not be able to afford him. Mathurin hasn't established that level of value yet.
No, but what I'm saying is
now he may be able to do that with the Clippers. I just because he's had kind of a lost year with the Pacers, they're going to be tanking. Like there's nothing he was going to be able to do the rest of the year to improve his value. Now he can do that with the Clippers.
That's possible, and so, but I just think teams it scares some front offices off when a player, when there's a reasonable expectation that they could be matched. It's just like, why is this worth our time? And there aren't ever going to be that many for a guy like this. There aren't ever going to be that many teams that are totally sold. And if some of that proportion is scared off, that's can get really narrow, something like
that. Matthew, seems like the Clippers took a couple of steps towards punting on the season. Seems odd they would shed so much talent when they seem to have righted the ship, gaining ground in the standings.
Gaining ground is important, but there's a lot of context that needs to go into that. The Clippers have been really good. When they trade James Harden, they had gone 17-5 in the recent stretch, but that 17-5 had gotten them to 23-27, and it was going to be very hard for them to get out of the play-in. And so they could be better. They could be a team that opponents wouldn't want to play in the play-in or the playoffs, but defining success, maybe that's just not enough for Steve Ballmer, not enough for Lawrence Frank. And so, and they sold to me, like I end up often being sympathetic to Clippers moves. I think they sold high on Harden and they sold high on Zubac. It's not like they just got out of Dodge and did something. No, they got real assets back for both of those players. And so you do that and then you sort the rest of this out. But the idea of, yes, they played a lot better, but how much, even if that, maybe not at 17-5, but if that continued well above 500 for the rest of the year, that's probably still not getting you into the top 6 unless one of those teams has a catastrophic injury.
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine. Certainly, they're not going to make the finals. Like this era, basically, they had decided when they didn't re-sign Paul George, they were realistic that they weren't going to win a championship. And yeah, you know what? They didn't have their pick, so you might as well re-sign Harden and see what happens with him. Well, he ended up actually being a vehicle for Darius Garland at that point. And Zubac, like, yeah, I mean, maybe if this type of deal had been on the table for him last offseason, they might have done it then. But it was too good to pass up. Harden, they didn't want to commit to him, and then he asked out. So that was really what started. They knew what was going to happen if they didn't accede based on history. He said it was all, hunky-dory and they all respected each other. But James Harden, we know what he does. His reputation precedes him when he doesn't get what he wants financially, and he has the leverage to get it. So I think once Harden was traded, then they really knew, like, Garland is, I don't know what his physical status is, but he was not going to be as good probably as Harden was this year. And then you're probably going to end up being the A seed and losing to OKC in the first round if everything goes well. Like, this team just didn't have the upside. They knew that ever since they let Paul George go. They would have retained him if they felt like they could win a championship. They just didn't think that was possible. I think the more accurate criticism of them. So, and this is a good enough package that they just, yeah, like, all right, so we don't make the playoffs, and we would have made maybe in the 8th seed and got our ass kicked by Oklahoma City in the first round. Like, why is that worth it? So I respect that decision. The other question to me is just, why didn't they just fire sale everybody at this point? Maybe honestly, they probably just didn't have enough time, would be my guess. Of like from the Harden thing developing and now the Zubats thing, it just
Well,
to find the best value for all these guys, it just wouldn't have been possible.
Well, and on top of that, the Clippers are they are asset poor, but if all you're doing is trading guys like Brook Lopez for seconds, you want to be a place that in a major market that players want to sign. And so if you're doing right by those guys, and they could do that through buyouts and other things as well, then maybe it's a different case. But you want to have that reputation. Now you have a reputation for planting certain trees and maybe compensating in those ways, but that's different than doing right by your low end vets and all that sort of stuff. So
Wait, Danny, hold on. Breaking news here. This is far more than anything we're talking about.
the one
Xavier
specific
Tillman
trade.
Sr. was indeed traded. The Celtics will get out of the tax. They will be doing a crazy dance with their remaining roster spots the rest of the season. But the Boston Celtics have gotten out of the tax. We were very worried that they weren't going to do it. It was causing me a lot of angst, right? Like just like you, when you go up for bed and you realize that you forgot to clean that last glass in the kitchen and put it in the dishwasher. It was there in the back of my mind, and now I as a capologist, I've got sweet relief.
Yeah,
To
it's a
realize
shame.
that's happened.
I don't know that we'll have the window to talk about. You and I broadcasted Celtics Rockets last night on the strategy stream, which was a truly fascinating game, and Joe Mazzulla's coaching and a lot of that type of stuff. And
Yeah, we'll probably talk about that on Sunday. Actually, I would guess.
But it was very, very interesting.
So let's get back to the Clippers here. See if we get any more.
Well, and so we got a question from Pipote of, does this hint that Kawhi Leonard is getting voided? I wouldn't say that it does that either direction. And I now maybe this indicates, because the commissioner has pretty broad latitude in terms of punishments here, like in terms of whether there will be pick punishment, whether it be the Clippers zone or something like that. Like, this is the type of trade you make if you don't think there's going to be like that this pick can be taken away. That I would say.
This is uncharted territory for all of us. Given these allegations, I have said that I believe the Clippers deserve to get at least the Joe Smith penalty. And frankly, I would be very on board with the league voiding Kawhi Leonard's contract as well, because, and I don't think they would do that during the season, but I would be totally on board with that, because there also needs to be deterrence for the ridiculous behavior that he and Uncle Dennis engaged in, asking for stuff that's not available in the CBA. Like, there should be deterrence in both ways, both from the player side and from the team side on this. Like, they've just been utterly shameless and brazen, and it kind of pisses me off, frankly. And to do it for like $7 million when your contract is like hundreds of millions of dollars, it just seems like absolutely ridiculous. But in any event, so yeah, we don't know what's gonna happen. Like, the league could do that. I mean, there are a lot of steps between that. First, an arbitrator has to find that there was circumvention, and then it's Adam Silver's ability to. Well, first there has to be the report. Then there has to be, they go to an arbitrator who determines there was circumvention. There would be a big fight with the Players Association. Silver has generally eschewed those fights, and it may just not be worth it to him, especially if they bring the hammer down on the Clippers. I would be surprised if the league takes away picks that the Clippers have traded for, though. That seems a little bit unfair to me. But they could certainly take away some of their own selections. 2030 and beyond are totally fair game for the league to take away. So, yeah, I mean, his contract could get voided. Maybe they will never find out about any of this stuff. I tend to think it's pretty unlikely, because it's just such a step beyond anything that's ever happened before Kawhi getting his contract voided. So I'm it's particularly because he's not on the contract that in theory he would have been enticed to sign with these circumvention benefits. So I don't think it's going to happen, but I can't rule it out. We're in totally uncharted territory here as far as I'm concerned.
So Nate, I'll give you the choice. I'm assuming you want to do another trade instead of the guys that were not traded next?
Let's see if we have any more questions here. I mean, maybe what we can do, we're probably going to go another 15-20 minutes here, and then we'll do the rest on Dunk Down Prime. So maybe we can take care of some of these comments. We'll hit a few other things here as well. Let's see.
So from 97 MDM, why did Ainge not accept the Pacers offer of 29 and 31 first in exchange for Walker Kessler? And so to me, part of it is the Jazz are trying to be competitive, and there is a distinct chance that Walker Kessler is going to get a significant salary. But if they lose Walker Kessler for those kind of distant assets, it's going to be hard to make that fit around. And part of their theory is that Walker Kessler is a starter on this team. It's not that he's a luxury, it's that he's a starter on the best version of the team. And so are you excited about being in the Indiana Pacers business? Like if it's unprotected picks in 29 and 31? Yeah, possibly. I mean, that's in some ways a bet against Tyrese Halliburton and all this other stuff because the rest of the roster around Halliburton's kind of old. But in terms of like that for the Jazz, I understand wanting to see this team together. And the other beauty of a restricted free agent is that most of the time, the contract they sign is at least going to be something that another team was willing to pay. And so it can end up being an overpay with additional context, like the player gets hurt or they end up being way worse than we thought they were. But it's hard for it to be an absolute disaster unless it's like the Otto Porter, Andrew Nicholson type of thing. That's relatively uncommon for a player like Kessler.
Yeah, and also Utah just traded away their pick for next year. Like they need to be good, and I don't know what else they could do to get a center as good as Kessler. Like they really need him next to Jaren Jackson Jr. Jaren Jackson Jr. has been proven is most effective with that kind of a big shot blocking center next to him who offensive rebounds and can dive. Like he's had his best years next to Zach Edey or Steven Adams. And as soon as you make that trade as Utah, then you're trying to find that guy. Like they're trying to win next year. I mean, would they be able to then turn those around and get a center as good as Walker Kessler? Like as soon as they traded him, they would be looking for the exact same guy. And like, you know, are we saying those are both unprotected picks? I didn't really see the reporting on this because I've been busy preparing our own stuff here. But
I believe I did see that, but I'm not going to go through all the tweets right now. Question from Drago: what injury designation is Zubac's getting first? Well, he's not going to get traded again, so it's not going to be quad. So we'll between that, I mean, they could go with a injury management for one of the various maladies that he's had over the last couple of years. Not that he's injury prone, but he's had a few things over the last couple of years. But the Indiana Pacers will not be pushing the accelerator hard with him this year. And that actually, we didn't talk about the incentives for the Pacers here in terms of having a 1 year double-sided protected pick. My inclination on this is that you try to maximize the chance that it is top four, both because that conveys a worse asset potentially to the Clippers, but also because then you get a top four pick. And so the odds are flat in terms of getting a top four pick from any of the three worst records. And another striking thing about this deadline is like, I think that the New Orleans Pelicans are going to, I think they don't have the same incentives. The Wizards are, the Wizards are the Wizards, but I think that there will be an avenue for the Pacers to continue losing and be in a solid position. Worth noting, we like to focus on wins for bad teams. Right now, the way this lays out, the Kings have 12 wins. The Pelicans, Pacers, Wizards, and Nets all have 13.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, they didn't play Siakam in that game against the Jazz, which they managed to lose despite the Jazz playing Isaiah Collier 48 minutes in that one. So I think, I mean, it's the rest of this season. This actually, gives the Pacers even more incentive, as you noted, to tank than they would have had before, and to try to maximize their chances of getting a top four. Well, so the odds on getting a top four pick are flat. When does that start reducing? Like in terms of what position in the lottery?
The fourth best odds. So 1, 2, 3, it's 14%, 13.4, 12.7, and 12. Then that 14% drops to 11.5 at the 4 slot.
Well, so that's
it drops to 12.5. It's because two
Yeah,
teams.
so that's for number 1 overall, and then top 4, you have if you're bottom 3, 52%, then it starts dropping off a little bit after that, but you're still at, Brooklyn and Washington are tied at 4 right now, so I'm looking at Tankathon. I can't see exactly. This is the danger
You
of doing this live.
You could make a hilarious argument that the Pacers would be incentivized to finish with the third worst record rather than first, because it makes it more likely that if they give up the pick, that it's a little bit worse for the Clippers. But that's pretty small.
Yeah, but I mean, they really are going to want to finish top 5, because once you get out of the top 5, then you only have a 37% chance of being in the top 4 or worse. So, yeah, I mean, I think they're going to try pretty hard. I would imagine, New Orleans is probably going to pass them, but everybody else is going to be trying real hard to keep their picks. Yeah, I mean, Indiana, Brooklyn, Washington, Utah. I mean, that's just Dallas now, Memphis. We'll see about Milwaukee, whether Giannis is actually going to come back. This is going to be an awful end of the season basketball wise. Let's see if we got anything else here. Will the Clippers start shutting down guys? They don't have their picks, so I don't really see why they would.
I think they'll be patient with their guys, but they won't shut them down fully.
Yeah, I mean, you could see Kawhi being on a 30-minute per game limit or something along those lines too.
And with Garland, it's more about next year potentially than this year, but you still want to see what he has.
Yeah, the Celtics, we could talk about this deal briefly here. Yeah, Matthew says, out of the tax while being at the top of the East is pretty amazing work by the Celtics. Yeah, that's awesome. Like they had $540 million in commitments at the start of this season, and they are now out of the tax. And they're like, if they got much worse on the floor, it's not by much.
Well, and the other point, Nate, you brought this up earlier in their overall deadline with the Simons Vooch trade, is that it hasn't cost them assets. Like it's the unusual that they didn't get that much worse, and they didn't have to burn through first. They didn't really burn through seconds either. Like Brad Stevens and this front office do a fantastic job of, I think they do a really good job of the big stuff, but they do maybe the best job for me in the entire league of the small stuff, of getting players, getting guys on the margins. They had a lot of that stuff in the game on Wednesday night, and making moves. They rolled the dice on Chris Boucher. Okay, that didn't work. They were able to get off it fine.
Oh, let's see here. Yeah, the Clippers don't even have their second this year, so they don't have any. Yeah, does anybody have their own second this year? At this point,
we'll stick Dan on that now that the deadline's over.
So let's see here. What else do we got? Oh yeah, this is a good one. Who is the biggest threat in restricted free agency for Kessler? So it's the Jazz are kind of coming up here as well. With the idea that maybe the Pacers could have traded for Kessler instead, the Jazz turning down potentially an offer. So who is the biggest threat for Kessler? In Chicago is they got Nick Richards, but they're probably going to need a center going forward. That's restricted free agents definitely lost out with some of these pre-agency moves.
They lost out
huge. Blinkett deserves credit for that one. That was a pretty good one.
But
yeah, I mean, there's really, for this upcoming year, and the Lakers could still be possibly a threat for him. They're going to want to reorient their team. Hey, the Clippers could make some salary cap space this offseason. But yeah, I mean, Chicago, Brooklyn, Brooklyn will still have.
Yeah, I mean, I could see a scenario where Brooklyn trades Claxton and then uses cap space to go make a couple offer sheets. I could see that for sure, and center would be on the table then.
Yeah, I mean, if I were them, I'd be So I think there's still suitors out there for these guys, but Chicago seems like the most obvious. Like Chicago massively overpaying for a player like Kessler would be very on brand, I would say.
I don't know. He's not a small guard or a center who's bad at defense. I'm a little bit skeptical. Or Patrick Williams.
With the Spurs of interest in Kessler? No, I don't think so. I mean, they got Luke Cornett. They don't really have room for a $30 million center in their salary structure. Um, are you surprised the Nuggets didn't explore trading Peyton Watson, considering this is almost certainly his last year on the team? I mean, maybe they did explore it, but and in our mock deadline, if you listen to that, I made an offer for him with Najee Marshall as the Mavericks, but I don't think there were really players out there that Denver could have traded him for that would have been cost controlled going forward, and that also would have given them it wouldn't have made them worse on the floor this season. So
Ben,
and they're trying to win a championship this year, so you can't make yourself worse this year.
I agree wholeheartedly. Question for Ben C about best future picks right now. We'll probably do that as a pod at some point of like the ranking the future assets that are included, and that
Oh
would
yeah,
kind of
we're
tie
overdue
in.
for that.
And it's also that's such a it's a great question, but it's kind of too big a question for a time like now. But we plan to pursue that at some point in the future. It's a pod that Nate and I both truly love to do.
Maybe you a little bit more than me, but
That's true. I mean, I used to do those pieces for Real GM about all this kind of stuff.
for sure. All right. Well, let's see if you guys got any more questions just on basically anything that you want. We can hit on it here. Yeah, let's any other like smaller moves you want to hit on? I think we can save the Giannis stuff for the and the Porzingis stuff for Dunked on Prime. You guys can sign up for that, of course, using the code Mock Deadline 26, which will get you 35% off a yearly membership. And if you're on monthly, you're getting more than 50% off over a year. Oh, this is a good one. What team? Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead. What's the question's better than my thought?
What team surprised you most this deadline?
The Wizards. And we'll talk about them. We'll talk about them in terms of winners and losers at a different point. But Washington, considering where they were, yes, you could. And I brought up this point when we talked about the AD trade that Ted Leonsis has done these sorts of things before. But the Wizards looked pretty clearly as like one of those teams who let's take another year to let's move through the gears, make sure we have our guys. Have Singer in the front office, and they've been really patient. To swing this dramatically the other way.
Winger,
sorry, not winger. Yeah. And to do that for these players, I think that's a massive surprise. Like the Jazz, both having Keontae George and kind of their unusual structure, that made a lot more sense to me than what the Wizards did, especially for adding in the Trey.
This is a great one from Matthew that I think we could close on here, which is, none of the worst teams acted as sellers. Three of the most fantastic teams were the only ones to give up first round picks to get players, and now they're going to be shutting those players down the rest of the season, which is ridiculous. So the type of trades you normally see, bad teams moving on from guys while contenders pick up guys. None of the contenders did anything really. I mean, Boston got Vooch, but that was kind of a lateral move at best, I would say. So yeah, very odd. And I think a lot of that is because of the finances. A lot of that is because these teams have already given up picks. A lot of that is because some of these bad teams are trying to get better next year or just didn't really have it. I mean, the Cavs getting Keon Ellis would be probably another one of those moves, but that they didn't give up a first.
And the Wolves with Dosunmu. Like those are kind of two of the other ones.
Yeah, the Wolves with Dosunmu's own, but yeah, they didn't have to give up a first for that. Great job, Chicago. Charlotte isn't really a contender, but they got Kobe White. You could argue maybe other teams should have got in on White, which we'll talk about that in the winners and losers, of course, on Dunked on Prime. So, yeah, I think that's really fascinating, and I think a lot of that is due to finances. A lot of that is due to these selling teams, like Chicago should have been a long time ago, just waiting too long. Maybe some of them had higher price, but like if you're the Brooklyn Nets, you're trying to win next year, right? And you could always just shut down Michael Porter Jr. this year. You want to hold on to Porter Jr. Maybe you trade him in the summer, or you're trying to take a step forward next year because you don't have your pick. So you might as well just hold on to him if you're not getting the package that you wanted. And just there weren't. And then I think maybe actually the other reason too, Danny, is the Giannis sweepstakes. I think really might have slowed things down for a lot of these teams where. Like Golden State, if their Giannis weren't out there, maybe they would have traded a first. Or some of these other teams, Miami might have tried to get better, or some of these other teams might just be saving their ammo for the offseason for Giannis. Maybe that's even part of what Brooklyn is going to be trying to do, for example. So, yeah, I think that's the real reason to me that we didn't see many of these kind of normal trades. And then also the finances too. Like these teams are all trying to save money and then also turning that into a player that gets kind of difficult. And there weren't that many true sellers out there either, right? Like the Jazz, Yusuf Nurkic, not really that great. They weren't going to get a first for him. So the truly tanking teams, other than Porter Jr., didn't have anybody really.
Well, and like a lot of the Kings, their guys have longer commitments, and so that's a different conversation for your front office than something like the Vooch for Simons deal, where it's like nobody has a long-term commitment.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us here on Dunked On, and you'll get the rest of this. We're going to talk winners and losers. We're going to go through every single trade. Giannis not traded. Kuminga is traded, but not for Giannis, for Kristaps Porzingis instead. And what teams should have done something, what teams did something and didn't do it well. Lots of things to discuss here. We're going to go through every deal on Dunked On Prime. And you can use that code MOCKDeadline26 to listen to all of it and get 35% off an entire year of Dunked On Prime. We'll see you all over there.